Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Argo Vermeer, and what I do here is I examine the metaphysics. I explicitly or exclusively look at metaphysical assumptions. In other words, the assumptions about the nature of man, reality, and the source of these things. These root assumptions which underwrite institutions, ideologies, philosophies, doctrines. So, what is man? What is reality? What does it mean to exist? Why are we here? Where did everything come from? These are fundamental assumptions which underwrite everything man does. Man is not an animal. Man is, in fact, a conceptualizing, self-aware agent. Man does not operate primarily on instinct or biological processes or deterministic laws of nature or mathematical determinism. No, man, because his nature is conscious, his nature is that of a conceptualizing observer. Why he's different from animals, is because he acts fundamentally according to assumptions. Assumptions about what he is, how he relates to his environment and others, and where all of existence comes from. These are these fundamental metaphysical assumptions which drive man to act and do and believe and think, and which underwrite, again, philosophies, institutions, schools of thought, doctrines, theologies, etc. Now today, we're going to talk about the diversity flag. Now, diversity as a political movement is in itself ironic. It's grotesquely ironic, and what I mean by grotesquely ironic is that it's intrinsically a contradiction. It offers the masses something, but it manifests as something entirely different. So what it offers is some kind of political equality, and what it really delivers is object collectivism and subservience to the ruling class. Diversity is itself a self-nullifying, intrinsically contradictory ideal, because diversity as a political ideal, which shall be enforced by the ruling class, that's the whole goal, is the ruling class must legislate diversity. So it must apply diversity universally to society. So all of society is to be made equal parts diverse. Once this happens, you have universal diversity, which is a contradiction in terms. If every aspect of society and every aspect of the reality of the citizens which operate in society is equal parts diverse, there is no more diversity. It is monolithically diverse, which is a contradiction. So diversity is just a Trojan horse for object-errant collectivism. Okay? It's to instill upon the masses a fundamental groupthink. So to stop thinking of themselves as individuals, as distinct from one another, and to stop thinking of their contextual group identity, so your smaller group identity, maybe a local group identity, your sexual orientation, your race, these kinds of group identities which you must hold. It's also intended to eradicate this, and to begin to see yourself as really just a manifestation of the universal group of man. Okay, so diversity represents the ultimate collectivization of man. It eradicates individual distinctions and it eradicates group distinction. We are all just one. So diversity is really a monolithic, fundamentally monolithic collectivist ideology that's meant to eradicate all differences, all value distinctions. It represents the ultimate collectivization of man. And once man is ultimately collectivized into the idea of it's just man, the people. So we are all just manifestation of this one giant infinite collective, this infinite absolute collective. Now, once this happens, once there's no relative distinction to be made between myself, my neighbor, this group or that group, what you've done is you've destroyed all value and you've destroyed all meaning. So the ultimate collectivization of man is the ultimate eradication of any ability of man to make any distinction whatsoever. So there's no distinction between you and your neighbor. There's no distinction between this group or that group. It's all just the collectivized one. Again, this fundamentally means the eradication of all value. You no longer can make value distinctions because you can no longer make relative comparisons. So it's the eradication of value by eradicating distinction, and therefore it's the eradication of truth. Value, or ethics, the ability of man to make value distinctions between this, that, this group, that group, this person, that group, that outcome, this behavior, that behavior. That comes from what man accepts as true. So man has this appreciation or this understanding, this epistemological understanding of this epistemological frame of reference. So this is true, this is false, this constitutes knowledge, this doesn't. So this is truth, and therefore this is how we act in service to it. So whatever is an application of truth, we value that as good. Whatever is not, we value that as bad. So, in other words, the ability to make value distinction is a direct expression of the ability of man to possess knowledge, to possess truth. So, the eradication of value distinction by the eradication of group distinction, and therefore implicitly the eradication of individual distinction, is the eradication of ethical value, which is the eradication of truth. The eradication of man. So, to eradicate the idea that man can know anything is to eliminate the efficacy and relevancy of his very consciousness. So once you destroy all distinction through oxymoronic ideals and self-nullifying contradictory ideas like diversity, once you wreck value distinction, thereby you wreck epistemological, you wreck truth, so you wreck epistemological distinction, the distinction between good and evil or good and bad is corollary to the distinction between truth and falsehood. Once those are eliminated, then consciousness is rendered moot. So this whole diversity movement is really just a Trojan horse for rendering the conscious man, the singular sense of oneself, irrelevant. It's to eradicate you qua you at the most fundamental level. So this is diversity. And again, if you want to think of it in more complex sort of philosophical terms like I just presented, you can. But fundamentally, you just have to look at it on its face. Diversity is a socio-political ideal that the government shall apply. How? Equally among society. So if all of society is equal parts diverse, so it all represents perfectly diversity, then it's all no longer diverse. Everything is equally diverse. It's universal diversity, which is a contradiction. You can make no claim that this part of society is more diverse than that. They're all the same level degree of diversity. It's no longer diverse. Monolithic diversity is a contradiction. So I don't know how else to explain that. In the diversity flag being a symbol of diversity, you can see the intrinsic contradiction in the diversity flag. Now, the diversity flag, it's the rainbow flag, if you're not familiar with it. It's the rainbow flag, which is typically the flag that symbolizes the LGBTQ plus movement. So it's to represent various sexual identity groups and to imply the fundamental natural and ethical value, equity or equality of these groups. So it's to recognize the natural and socio-political and economic equality of all of these groups. That's the rainbow flag, and then you have the added chevron of the diversity flag. So they add the chevron of black, white, blue, pink, and brown to represent the various racial groups as well as the cisgenders. I believe it's the two sort of cisgender groups, identities, straight white man, or straight men, straight women, etc. So you have this diversity flag, which is supposed to represent all of the groups. Basically, it's a symbol that recognizes however groups of men and women might manifest themselves. So it's a symbolic representation of various groups, racial groups, sexual identity, gender identity, perhaps even religion. So you have all these colors representing all these groups, right? That's the diversity flag. So these colors represent all manner of racial and sexual identity groups. Their inclusion in the flag represents the perfect equality and social harmony amongst and between the groups. Now, before I go on, I do want to say I'm not demonizing. It's not an attack on any people in these groups. I'm an individualist. So, on the contrary, I value the individual. Diversity movement and the diversity flag do just the opposite. They seek to collectivize you. They first acknowledge your collective identity according to some kind of contextual group, and then they seek to sublimate that into a broader, sort of all-encompassing one group of oneness. The diversity flag represents the fundamental equality of all these groups. Therefore, they become not various groups, but one group. They're all equal. At the fundamental, existential, socio-political, and economic level, they're all the same. So there's no real distinction. So they all become one group. So the idea of diversity and diversity flag is to subordinate you, qua you, into some transcendent, infinite, ethereal, hyper-subjective kind of group identity, just the oneness of man kind of thing. I, on the other hand, am an individualist. I specifically promote the idea that the individual is first and foremost an expression of himself, his own ability to exist as a singular, conscious, observational frame of reference. So I don't mean to demonize any people or persons at all. This is me simply pointing out that diversity and its symbol, the diversity flag, are inherent fundamental contradictions, which will not create harmony or equality, but will instead create chaos and ultimately destruction. Once man is ultimately collectivized, he is dead. He's done. Collectivism is a metaphysical. Collectivism is a philosophy or a collectivism or collectivist metaphysics are ideas about the nature of man, which are in fact actually anathema to his true nature. Man is in fact an individual. Man is not a function of some kind of transcendent collective ideal or identity. Man is a function of his own ability to exist as a singular conscious frame of reference. Collectivism and metaphysics, therefore, are entirely anathema to man, because man is not collective. Man is himself. Man is an individual. Man is not the collective. So the ultimate subordination of man into a giant one-world collective, which is what I submit diversity seeks to do, represents the object destruction of the species, of the human race writ large. So, I'm an individualist and I reject that. So this is an attack on the lie, the Trojan horse, the collectivist, globalist, neo-communist movement. Diversity is a Trojan horse for the absolute collectivization of man under one world government. I can't put it any more bluntly than that. That's what diversity seeks to do. It seeks to subordinate man in all of his various group identities into one giant, infinite collective, which will thus be governed by one political ruling elite. This is what diversity represents. And this is what I am criticizing. So, these colors represent all manner of racial and sexual identity groups. Their inclusion in the flag represents the perfect equality and social harmony amongst and between the groups, as well as asserting the goal of socio-economic and political equity, that all groups would be seen as possessing fundamentally equal socio-economic and political value. And you need to understand, this is what's important. This is a function merely of their existence. That is, because these groups exist at all, they must be considered to be equally socio-economically and politically valuable. I can't stress enough the fundamentality, if that's a word, of this of the ideology of diversity. These groups are to be considered equal in value because they exist. They have existential equality. These groups are entirely equal. There is no fundamental existential difference there to be valued as if they were all the same group, you see? Okay, so The how they exist, why they exist, the practicalities of their existence are all irrelevant. They matter because they are, period. And they all matter equally. That's why they're all included in one symbol. There is no fundamental value distinction to be made. Therefore, there is no fundamental existential distinction to be made between the various groups represented in the diversity flag. And by extension, the individuals in those groups. They're all one and the same. There is no existential distinction because there's no value distinction at all. The mere fact that they exist is why they're equal. So, how they exist, why they exist are all fundamentally irrelevant. The mere fact that they exist means that they intrinsically possess equal socioeconomic and political value and therefore are entitled to equal outcomes. No group can have more or less than the other. It's perfect collectivism. You see, perfect communism. Outcomes are a function of basic existential value, and it's always the same between groups. There can be no favoritism. All groups get the same because they're all equally valuable. That's what the diversity flag represents. It's fundamental existential equality of the groups. This is the irony. This is the contradiction. So they all must share socioeconomic and political power and outcomes equally. Okay? How and why of their existence, the practical consequences, are they moral, are they immoral, are they economically relevant or irrelevant, are they ideologically rational or consistent? None of this matters at all. Those are all subjective value judgments that are meaningless with respect to the true value insofar as the political ruling elite are supposed to see them. Political ruling elite are supposed to see no distinction whatsoever in these groups. Because they exist, they all have the same value, period. Therefore, all of them are entitled to the same outcomes. That's diversity. That's the diversity flag's message. I'm not saying whether you think it's right or wrong or should. That's the message. The problem is that this message wrecks diversity. If all the groups are the same at the most fundamental level, then there's no diversity by definition. They are all one group. This is what I'm talking about. Diversity is a Trojan horse for the supreme and ultimate collectivization of man. Man will be universally and globally collectivized, and then he will exist at the behest of a single global political ruling elite. You might think this sounds crazy. Fine. You can think what you want to think. Nobody's on the hook for accepting what I have to say or not. You can examine it. It's all up to you. I assume and assert no authority whatsoever. You want to call me crazy? Call me crazy. But look, 2 + 2 cannot equal 5. So you can think it can till you're blue in the face. You will never get 2 + 2 to equal 5. You will never make a square circle. Diversity wants to maintain a diverse distinction between people, whilst at the same time rendering them functionally the same, fundamentally the same with regard to their very existence. So it wants to have them be diverse and not diverse at the same time. This is nonsense. It's nonsense. It can't work. There's a reason why this is happening. There is a specific political reason why they're pushing this Trojan horse of collectivist, globalist, neo-communism on you through ideas like diversity. Because it sounds good. It feels good. It tastes good. The reason why the rats eat the poison is because it tastes good. And I am asserting that the intellectual vanguard of these kinds of movements understand what they're doing. Most of you don't. Most of you just see diversity and the coexist bumper stickers and go, oh my God, your hearts go aflutter. That sounds great. Let's just all treat each other with love and equality. You don't understand the kind of malevolence you're dealing with here. This is a psyop, okay? They know you're not going to examine the metaphysics. They know you're not going to think too deeply about these things. As long as they sound good and feel good, and then you'll accept them. You need to be much more discerning than that. But if you don't want to believe me, then don't believe me. Want to think I'm crazy? Think I'm crazy. But Again, 2 plus 2 will never equal 5, no matter how hard you try. So, anyway, so these groups, according to the symbol of the diversity flag, really what this means is these groups are to be considered ultimately and fundamentally equal in their root being. At root, there is no difference then. They are all one group as far as anyone is ultimately concerned. You, me, the masses, any public or private institution, and the state, the government, must consider these groups, and again, the individuals that are expressions of these groups, right? This is a collectivist symbol. There's nothing individualistic about the diversity movement. So, we must consider these groups to possess no relevant, meaningful differences whatsoever. They are all equally valuable. Any preference or any qualification, any judgment whatsoever, of any kind which is not purely superficial and ultimately irrelevant and meaningless, is to be considered rank bigotry and should be considered criminal and will be criminalized and already is. You can't say this about this group or that group. You can't have preferential hiring for this group or that group. Again, I'm not saying whether this is right or wrong. I'm saying you are already seeing manifestations about this. You are not allowed to make value distinctions among groups and therefore among the individual expressions of these groups. You can maybe have them in your personal, your little individual brain might have these preferences or make these value distinctions, but they can never be realized with to any practical degree in society because they'll be criminalized. Practically speaking, you have to assume that you can make no value distinction between any group because they are all existentially equal. They are all metaphysically true, in other words. So, at a fundamental root level, all of these groups must be considered to possess equal value. You are not allowed to consider them different to any relevant degree or for any relevant purpose. A man as a woman. See, and what this does, because the value is the same between man, woman, black, white, gay, straight, because the fundamental existential value is equal, the collectivist metaphysics are telling you you cannot make value distinctions among groups, and therefore, among the individual manifestations of these groups, that's what collectivist metaphysics tells you, fundamentally there's no difference. So what the diversity flag is really saying is that a man as a woman is a man. A gay is a straight is a gay. A black is a white is a black. You see? They're all one and the same. There's no fundamental distinction or value judgment. There's no value judgment, and therefore there's no epistemological distinction that you can make. They're all equally true. They're all equally good because they all equally exist. This is the collectivist metaphysics of diversity. And again, believe me, don't believe me, that's up to you. I'm telling you, this is what this is. Okay? And notice, as an aside, they want diversity in society, but they don't listen. It's interesting. They call it diversity, but not distinction. There's a fine definitional difference between distinction and diversity. You can universally apply diversity. If you're a political ruling elite, you can apply diversity. You can force diversity. But you can't really force distinction. How do you enforce political distinction? Because distinction implicitly, so distinction implies value judgment, right? To make a distinction between this and that. It implies an objective, meaningful difference between this and that. But diversity, not necessarily so. Diversity is entirely superficial. So it's interesting that it's not the distinction movement, it's the diversity movement. Distinction is something that's very hard, if not impossible, to collectivize. But diversity is very easy. Because diversity is simply superficial. It's all perception. Where distinction is much more fundamental. So it's interesting. They don't say the distinction movement, it's the diversity movement. It's very fine, how shall I put it? It's a very fine epistemological tweaking going on. They're very fine, sort of. It's a very fine use of terms. It's very complex propaganda there. But anyway, so there's no fundamental difference existentially speaking. Sure, there are diverse and different in some perhaps rhetorical sort of way, but perhaps as a matter of purely superficial perception. Again, diversity is all perception. Fundamentally, it's identical. There's no value existential distinction. The diversity is purely perception. That's it. It's no more meaningful than what's on the surface. At the root, there's no distinction at all. The distinction of diversity is purely superficial. It looks diverse, it looks distinct, but it's not. That's diversity. It's the appearance of distinction without any actual fundamental distinction. That is diversity. So any diversity really, again, all the differences in these groups are fundamentally superficial, which means that fundamentally, they are all really one and the same. They are one. You're starting to see the irony now, I'm sure. So for all practical purposes, these groups are all one and the same. All differences, quote unquote, are subjective. The state, which is the metaphysical root of man's existence. So collectivist metaphysics are the metaphysics which underwrite government. So the metaphysical assumptions which underwrite the existence of government in any iteration are all collectivist. The ruling class is an incarnation of a fundamental, a transcendent and absolute and infinite collective ideal. It's very Gnostic. Okay, so you have a collective ideal, which is to be all of reality and all manner to be an expression of the collective ideal. It can be the race, the church, the working class, anything really, the nation state, whatever. But this is a transcendent ideal. It's an absolute. It's beyond man. It's beyond the realm of the material universe. Whatever. It's out there in the ether, right? It's a transcendent, abstract, infinite thing, right? So it needs a practical incarnation to implement its will, and that's where the state comes in. So the political ruling elite represents the incarnation of the collective ideal. I've said this before. The collective ideal is God, then the ruling class is Christ. So with diversity. The state, which represents the metaphysical. So you, as a citizen, are to act as an expression of the collective ideal, which means in practice to act as an expression of the will of the ruling class. So this ruling class shall see no real difference in these groups. It shall rule these groups and see them and value them as if they are one. So the diversity flag, ironically, this is where the grotesque irony comes in. The diversity flag has actually eliminated diversity, you see, as a thing at the root level. Okay, so the difference in these diverse groups are entirely subjective and ultimately irrelevant, where diversity can actually matter at the fundamental level. In individualism, there is an actual fundamental metaphysical distinction between individuals. The self is corollary to other. So I have myself and yourself. So I have myself and my neighbor, me and you. These are metaphysical corollaries according to the metaphysics of individualism. They are absolutely distinct. I am not you. You are not me. But we are corollary. We share metaphysical value because we're corollary to one another. The existence of myself implies the existence of the other. There is an objective metaphysical distinction. It's a corollary. But what is a corollary? It's the inevitable perpetual relationship which implies a distinction. So in individualism, there is an absolute metaphysical distinction between myself and my neighbor. We can make actual objective value judgments then between what I do and what you do. This is not possible in collectivism. There is no metaphysical distinction to be made between this group and that group, and therefore the individuals in those groups. They're all the same. There's no metaphysical distinction at all, you see? So this is the difference between individualism and collectivism. I'm an individualist. So my metaphysical distinctions are absolute and exist. Collectivist metaphysical distinctions, there are none. You are your neighbor is you. Black is white, white is black, gay is straight, gay is straight is gay, black is white is black. Right? Gay, male is female is male, you see? So the diversity flag is an irony, right? It's a contradiction. The symbol is a rank contradiction, but it has a purpose, right? It makes you feel good. It's the Trojan horse. It's the bromide. It's the gift. But inside's the poison, right? The rat won't eat the poison. The masses won't eat the poison of rank globalist collectivism if it doesn't taste good. Diversity is the candy coating that makes you want to eat it. Poison is on the inside. The diversity flag makes you feel good. But on the inside, what underwrites it is the poison, which destroys man. So, the symbol's a rank contradiction. It's nothing but a symbol of the grotesque and manipulative irony of the shameless collectivist autocrats and rank moral relativists of the West political left and increasingly the political right. We have a uniparty in the United States, and I think pretty much everywhere in the West at this point. So you have a symbol of the kind and tolerant left, and also increasingly the right, wrapped up in a diversity flag, which implicitly rejects the entire concept of diversity. Now, I declare to you that this is not an accident. The people behind the diversity movement, now again, I'm not talking about the rank and file, I'm talking about the intellectual vanguard of the political left and increasingly the right. And they know exactly what they're doing. The Trojan horse was built on purpose. The people who built the Trojan horse knew what they were building and knew what it was about. The same thing is true with the diversity movement. The intellectual the vanguard, the intellectual philosopher king class, which promotes this kind of stuff, knows exactly what it's doing. Again, the rank and file don't, but they do. They know exactly what they're doing, and you're falling for it. And so was I for a long time. They're banking on the fact that we're never going to examine the fundamentals. We always only look at the superficial. That's how we're conditioned as the masses. That's how we're propagandized and brainwashed. So yes, they are assuming, and unfortunately in most cases rightly so, that we don't look beyond the actual Trojan horse. We never stop to consider what might be inside it. We don't like to think. Thinking is hard. We don't like to do hard things in the West anymore. In particular, we're talking about a complex form of propaganda like the diversity movement, the diversity and inclusion movement. It's relatively philosophically complex, right down to the metaphysics. They know you're not going to examine it. You'll give up in 2 minutes. But you can change that. That's not written in stone. You aren't determined to never examine it. You can start to examine it. Thinking is hard, but the more you do it, like anything else, it gets easier. But unfortunately, besides this channel of mine, this tiny, nothing, pathetic channel, no one examines, really, I can't tell, that anyone else is examining the metaphysics specifically. Which is a shame, and we probably should. But behind this tiny little nothing, pathetic channel that I have, in my clumsy way of presenting this material, I don't think anybody else is doing this. That's a shame. It's a recipe for disaster. We just need to have more thinking people in the world. We just do. And I don't know how to change that. This is the best I can do for now, is this pathetic little channel. I'm hoping somebody will take up the mantle. Or just, or I don't know. Anyway, I'll move on from that. I don't want to wallow in my social media failure for too long. But okay, so the diversity flag is an extension of the diversity political movement, an object manifestation, I declare and submit, of neo-communism, globalist neo-communism. So this reduces the quote-unquote diverse racial, cultural, and sexual gender identity groups, all groups of all men, really, and women, to a single non-diverse collective. There is to be no diversity among men. All are one. All peoples are to be the people in the globalist neo-communist collective. They are to be the globalist neo-communist collective, and they shall be ruled totally by the one world political ruling class. Call me crazy. If you understand collectivist metaphysics, you understand that this is exactly where it's all going. So, look, if you examine the collectivist metaphysics, this is exactly where they point. And it seems to me, if you look around, Power is being consolidated, not diversified in the world. It is more and more becoming consolidated. The number of different organizations that seem to control and run things around the world is dwindling. This is all a product of the collectivist metaphysics, which have been informing mankind for thousands of years. It was always going to go this way, and it's going to go this way. So you can think it's just some pie-in-the-sky conspiracy theory, this one-world government. It's going to happen. The collectivist metaphysics have determined it. And once you accept the collectivist metaphysics, which underwrite the state, once you accept the legitimacy of the state, you accept that it's a legitimate institution that exists for a legitimate reason, to do something legitimate. If that's your assumption, that you've already made your choice, you've already accepted that collectivism is the metaphysical basis upon which you will live your life. This means that every single step you take, every choice you make, everything you do is always going to be in service to the one world government, the universal collective, and ultimately the collapse of the human species. This is not to guilt monger you. I'm not saying you're doing it consciously or purposefully or to condemn you or to make you feel guilty. I'm saying that the collectivist, the collective ideal, the collectivist metaphysics which underwrite government are determinist. Once you are in that matrix, not to sound too cliche, choice is an illusion. Once you have accepted that collectivist metaphysics are the true metaphysics, once you've accepted that these assumptions about your nature, that you shall be ruled by a political ruling elite, which shall compel you hither and thither, because in your nature you are in and of yourself as an individual insufficient to the apprehension of truth and acting in service to it according to your own individual nature. Once you've rejected that, all choice is an illusion. Everything's determined. The collectivist metaphysical assumption proceeds to an inevitable outcome. It's inevitable. Choice in this context is an illusion. So the die is cast in the furnace of collectivist metaphysics. In absence some kind of great and unseen collapse of collectivist ideology worldwide, which is almost certainly not going to happen, this will happen. So I have some more things to say, but I don't really want to get into it. It gets a little depressing. Yeah, okay, so the only real solution within the matrix of collectivism, again, it's hard not to sound cliche. It always sounds like you're doing the cliche thing and referring to the matrix, but the problem is that you can't talk about this stuff or any matrix without it sounding like you're being cliche, because that movie exists, and that movie was so culturally and ideologically profound, it's hard to get around it, and it's fine. I love that movie. The first Matrix is to me it is profound. So if I sound cliche, that's okay. I don't really mean to, but I can't seem to get around it, and it's okay because that's a good movie, and I understand it. But the point is no matter what you think or what you want or what you do, once you're inside the collectivist matrix, choice is an illusion, right? There is no choice. Every step you take, every choice you make is always in service to the ultimate end of the collectivist metaphysics, which is the universalization of man into one giant global collective, which shall be ruled by the one world government. That one world government will have its power consolidated in the hands of a single individual, because power cannot be bifurcated. Power is an absolute. And power is intrinsically a contradictory... Power is a self-nullifying contradictory proposition, because power is the idea that everything has to be an expression of it. But of course, once it controls everything, there's only power. So it has nothing to exercise. So power, once it reaches its ultimate gain of ultimate absolute power, it has nothing to exercise power over anymore. Only itself exists, in which case it becomes a self-contradictory, in which case it self-nullifies. It's no longer power because there's nothing left to exert power over. So again, this will result in the collapse of the human race as we know it, and this is always the outcome. But this is why there's no real choice. The outcome, once you've accepted collectivist metaphysics, you've already accepted the outcome, which is the annihilation of the species. So the only real solution is you have to overwrite collectivism with individualism. You have to, I don't know, I'm not a computer guy, but you have to, I don't know, you have to install a new program or put in a new hard drive or something. You have to overwrite collectivism with an entirely new metaphysical presupposition. That's the only solution. Once you're in the matrix, you're in. And you're going to act according to it. The only way out is for you to accept that you are not a function of the matrix. You are actually you. You must embrace individualism and reject collectivism. That's the only way out. You must embrace collectivism and reject individualism. So I think that's all I have to say for today. I appreciate you listening. I hope this was interesting or educational. How long did I go? Oh, 40 minutes. Oh, I hate doing the 40-minute thing. Videos that are 40 minutes are kind of the worst length, right? They're a little too long and they're a little too short. I really apologize, but anyway, it is what it is. I hope it's not too annoying. Thank you to anybody who's listening. I don't do comments on YouTube, and I've explained why in previous videos. But if you do want to comment, you can go to my blog, unreformingtheology.com, where I have articles and stuff, but I have all the links to these videos. So you can certainly comment on this video, you just have to do it on my blog. That step alone tends to weed out the trolls and the people who just want to insult me. Not always, but typically, if you're interested in expending the kind of time and energy it takes to actually just go to a different site and comment there, then that to me represents somebody who might actually have something to say. You're willing to spend a little to comment, a little time and energy to comment. So that's partly why I don't do comments on YouTube. It's a good way to kind of weed out the trolls. And there's other reasons too, but I won't bore you. All right, so I hope that was interesting and educational or whatever. And please like and subscribe if you would like to. And having said that, I wish you all a great rest of your day and a good week. And until next time, when I talk at you later, I'm Argo Vermeer, and I am out.